Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Good morning. It's so great to see all of you here. My name is Oren Slosberg. I'm part of the Commonweal community. I'm the program director for Healing Circles and for the Center for Creative Community and the executive director of Commonweal. Commonweal is a center where entrepreneurial and innovative leaders make a big difference in the world. And our role here is to not only catalyze, build their capacity, and convene people, but also to share our core values of healing, resilience, and justice. Our work is sourced in the Cancer Help Program that started here 36 years ago. And so much of what we do has been inspired by working with people who are facing cancer and are learning to develop their own resilience. And our work today is focused on the existential challenges that the planet has, which is in some ways parallel to what you do when you face cancer. The globe in itself has had a lot of challenges. So we work on what is the resilience that we need personally as a community in the physical sense, like building a microgrid and knowing where your water and food comes from, and also in a national sense. So Commonweal works locally and it works globally. It works in Bolinas and it works in Africa, India, and South America. Our main focus is when it comes to content around health and healing, environmental health, environmental justice, and working in the educations and the arts. And we're here to a conversation between Steve Heilig and Peter Coyote. And usually when Steve leads conversations, we just take him for granted as that guy. But turns out there's a lot more to Steve than meets the eye. He's a long-term researcher, has been with Commonweal for how many years? 20, 30? He's been here since I was born 30 years ago. He's the co-founder of the Collaboration on Health and the Environment. He hosts the new school. He was trained at 5 University of California campuses in public health, in medical ethics, and addiction medicine, economics, environmental sciences, and other disciplines. I don't think you left anything out. His other work includes a position at the San Francisco Medical Society, California Pacific Medical Center, and the co-editor of the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics. He has served on many nonprofits board. He has done so many things, it's hard to describe. He's really a pillar of our community here. I wanted to thank you, Peter, for spending your day here with us. Thank you, Steve, for hosting. Thank you for the Point Reyes Bookstore, who are our co-hosts. Oh, and I should tell you that the artist who painted here is Cynthia Flesher, and there's more information about her work over there. And our media sponsor is KWMR, and we're so grateful for that. Go KWMR, and with that, Mr. Heilig, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Oren. So all that stuff he said is really a symptom of attention deficit disorder, so we're going to focus attention by starting this way. Thank you. Official Zen priests are really good at that. So, welcome everybody. Add my welcome. Thank you for coming out today to this wonderful place. And we're going to get right into it. I asked my friend Peter to show up, and just perfect timing as he has a brand new book out here. And it's really, I read the whole thing, obviously. There's all the proof, there's all the quotes inside. It looks like a rooster or something.
He does that for all the authors.
Yeah. And it's really a meaty book in a sense that there's so much in this that it made me nervous. How do you cover, much that's in here? And the thing that I really like about it is, having looked at many books about Buddhism through the time, he mixes in his personal experience with it and how he came to a lot of these discussions that are in here. And some of it started with COVID in 2000, where he started doing online Zoom talks, Dharma talks about various subjects. I tuned into a lot of those, and they're really great, and you can see them in the book here. So let's start at the very beginning. The cover, the title, Zen in the Vernacular, Things as It Is. Strangely enough, this reminded me of my mother, because she was really a stickler for stuff. And I flashed back to being about 12 years old, she's driving me along, and Joni Mitchell comes on the radio, playing really good for free. And Mom says, she has such a sweet voice, but it's playing really well for free. So please explain Things As It Is.
So Things As It Is was one of the favorite expressions of Suzuki Roshi, who was the founder of my lineage, founded San Francisco Zen Center and Green Gulch Farm and Tassajara. And when I first started studying there in '74, I thought, oh, this is just a charming idiomatic error of a guy whose English is not perfect. And it's kind of like that guy who said, Mark Twain, actually, who said, when I was 14, I thought my father was the dumbest son of a bitch on earth. When I was 21, I was amazed by how much he'd learned. As I got deeper into Zen practice, I realized it was a perfect expression, simultaneous expression of singularity, which is it, and the apparent multiplicity of things, the 10,000 things in the world. So Things As It Is, all these disparate, apparently separate things with separate names and identities are actually part of one great inviolable monism. Buddhism is not a bisected reality. We don't think of good and evil. All the Abrahamic religions have a God of good, they have a God of evil. Buddhism is, we're all ticks on the body of a dog.
In the book, you talk about first encountering Zen Buddhism and books when you're 14 years old. Philip Kapleau, The Three Pillars of Zen. And this great passage, I began an obsessive course of reading about Zen, and before long was anesthetizing my friends by quoting Zen aphorisms and koans as if I understood them, practicing idiosyncratic forms of speech filled with cryptic, mystical-sounding utterances. I mean, how should a friend respond when he asks you what's for lunch and you answer, quote, "The crow with no beak eats only no food"? Somebody should have slapped me. I knew these people, and it's very interesting to think of this because in the 1970s, when I was that age, I read Gary Snyder, and then I read Jack Kerouac, the Dharma Bums, and got really fascinated by it, but never really followed up, tried meditating, and so forth. And you took a really long path too, circuitous path to really getting serious.
That's an understatement.
Yes. So from 14 to whatever, you were actually ordained 12 years ago, right? So you've got like a half a century it took you together. What took you so long?
Well, so the beginning is interesting. So I come from a secular Jewish family with a lot of communists and a lot of socialists. People who, I was born in 1941. And so after World War II, the government realized they were going to be in competition with Russia for ideology and world goods and resources. So they began a kind of ham-fisted program of turning the people against anything smacking of socialism or communism. And the vessel for that was Joseph McCarthy. And his hearing, who's a dead ringer for Ted Cruz, by the way. I can't even see him or hear his voice without getting ill. Anyway, I watched grown-ups in my family broken, weeping, losing their jobs. They were called before committees, and they were given. By then, most of them had left the Communist Party. They'd seen who Stalin was. They were labor organizers and school teachers and do-gooders, but then they were put on the spot to betray friends who'd been in the Communist Party with them. And if they didn't, they would lose their jobs. And if they did, their friends would lose their jobs. And it was a bad period, and it made me really angry. So angry that I don't think I ever saluted the flag since I was 12. I gave that up. I salute the flag now. So reading the Beats were the first adults who ever gave me a framework for that anger and what it was about my culture I didn't like: the materialism, the greed, the imperialism, the racism, all of these things that were going on that I was trying to filter through a 10-year-old or 11-year-old brain. And so when I started reading these people, they all began talking about Zen, and Zen, that's how I heard the word. So I got curious about it, and I began reading about it. And of course, the problem is that it's not just an intellectual understanding. Your body has to learn how to take care of the mind. Your body has to learn to let your personality go. So I had a long period of time where I just lived in the world. I was going to say like everyone else, but I was a heroin addict for 8 years. I was living on communes. I used to live in Olima on a commune over there, and then we had strings of communes all up the coast through Salmon River, Black Bear, which still keeps going. But I had the good fortune during that period, a friend, Lou Welch, one of the beat poets, kept insisting I had to meet Gary Snyder. And so we brought Gary out to Olima, and it was amazing how unfazed Gary was by my reporting of what an important and radical person I was. He just kept spreading peanut butter on crackers in the back of a brand new Volkswagen camper, which I thought was really pretty bougie. We were like a hard scrabbled, dirt poor commune. If we made $2,500 a year, that was a fat year. And he just kept looking at me and trying to figure out who I was. And there was something about that look that really sunk a hook in me. And I just decided I had to know this guy. I knew that he'd lived in Japan for 9 years. I knew he'd been an ordained priest. I figured if anyone knew anything about Buddhism, it was this guy. So I began going to visit him up in the Sierras, and I'd grown up on a farm. I was pretty handy. And we struck up a friendship, and we've been friends. I just did his 93rd birthday party on YouTube. So he was the guy that really made me look at Zen as a practice. And then in 1974, I fell in love with a woman who I later married, who was a serious Zen student, living at San Francisco Zen Center, which is a very formal Eiheiji-style practice. Suzuki Roshi brought teachers from the most prominent temples in Japan to help him. And in the 8 years that I lived there, I probably changed more than I'd ever changed in any period in my life. But at a certain point, and this became the genesis of this book, a certain point I began to get restive about what felt like a kind of slavish repetition of Japanese cultural expression. Buddha didn't speak Japanese. He was born in Nepal, and everywhere that Buddhism went, it kind of covered itself in the gift wrapping of that culture, so as not to piss off the emperor, so as not to offend the everyday mores and norms of the people. And I began to think, since we take these vows to save all beings, most Americans were not going to shave their heads and wear black robes and chant in Japanese. I still chant memorial services in Japanese because I like them. So I began thinking, what would it be like to loosen the gift wrapping, the Japanese gift wrapping? Because it's pretty easy to confuse the esoterica of Japanese practice or Indian practice or a Tibetan practice with the wisdom itself. And Buddha's wisdom is universal, and it's universally applicable. And then when Buddhism came to the West, we had an incredible opportunity, because for the entirety of its existence, it had been under the patronage of kings and emperors and monarchs. And it had to be very careful not to offend them. So Buddhism has not been very strong on things like civil rights and liberties and social justice. And they've not spent a lot of time investigating the way certain social formulations can increase suffering. So we had this opportunity in America to look at things afresh. And so, as Steve told you, I did the first 2 years of the pandemic, I did these weekly Dharma talks. And then I transcribed them and read them and thought, oh, I can do better than that, and re-edited them into this book, because there's something about a book that's nice, quite different from rewinding tape.
Last time, your previous book, Rainman's Third Cure, that's what we were talking about last time here. Rainman's Third Cure comes from a famous Bob Dylan lyric, and it's a more autobiographical book talking about how this was what finally saved you from some of those addictions and so forth. And I actually went back to this book. Buddha observed that we are all already enlightened, and a Buddhist teacher friend qualified that remark by adding, the problem is that we don't believe it. What separates spiritual practitioners from others is their commitment to attend the intuitive voice within. This is available to all religions and practices, allows us to wet our feet in the endless current of deep wisdom that runs through the universe. This is the Rainman's third cure.
Yeah, Dylan only talked about 2 cures, because he wrote the song when he was in his 20s when I heard it. You probably know it. The Rain Man gave me 2 cures. He said to jump right in. The one was Texas medicine. The other was railroad gin. And like a fool, I mixed them, and they strangled up my mind. And now people just get uglier, and I have no sense of time. So I thought, okay, I get this Texas medicine, peyote, psychedelics, the world of love, the world of inclusion, the world of the counterculture. I'll let that be a meme for that. And railroad gin, I'll let that be a meme for the robber barons and the people who want status and power and wealth and competition. And so I thought those were the only 2 options when I was young, and the trick was to get the mix right. Love without power is flaccid, and power without love is fascism. By the time I was in my 50s, I understood there was something that neither Dylan nor I understood in our youth, which is there's a third cure, which is wisdom. And pursuit of Buddhist practice was one of the avenues to wisdom. I used to go out to Haute Villa in Arizona and stay with an old Hopi 92-year-old snake priest named David Benangi. And one day I realized that I was not a Hopi. No one was going to initiate me into the deepest truths of that culture. I still go out there. I was there this year for the bean dance. But I realized that Buddhism was a world religion, a world practice anyway, and they had to take me. And my feeling was that at root, all religious practices or spiritual practices are revolving around the same transcendental truth, and so all roads lead to Rome. So I just settled on Buddhist practice.
Was it easier to put this one together than this one? I think when you were last time you said writing this one was like crapping a porcupine backwards. So
yeah, this one was easier because I got to sit in front of a microphone and mouth off every week or so. And then I got the chance to make myself smarter by correcting what I'd said and clarifying it. And so it was more of an editing job than an invention.
So going forward through your practice, you had this experience known as kensho. Mm-hmm. And this is what many people see as like the aim, enlightenment or something, but you report on it much differently in your book. What is kensho and what was your experience of it?
So, yeah, we're goal-oriented people. So if somebody tells you that there's a state of mind that exists, they call it enlightenment or kensho or awakening, and you're going to study Buddhism, of course, you're going to say, that's the brass ring, that's what I want, it's all or nothing. There was an event in Central Park in New York when the Dalai Lama was there, and somebody asked him, what's the quickest way I can get to enlightenment? And he began to cry. And someone asked Suzuki Roshi, what's enlightenment? And Suzuki Roshi said, you might not like it. So I had been studying for a long time. I was in my late 60s. I had liver spots on my hand that had hep C for 45 years, and I was sitting a sesshin, 7-day sesshin from 5:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night, and it's pretty agonizing. I was in such pain in my legs. I called my teacher, and at the end of the second day, I said, I just can't do it. I'm sorry, I can't do it. And he said, hold on. He said, you're really mourning your old age. You're mourning the fact that all your cards are on the table and you're not getting any new cards. So you've got to work with what you have. You don't have any more knees. If you have to sit in a chair, sit in a chair. You have to take care of your body. This is it. And so with that permission, I began alternating between sitting on my pillow, with one leg hiked up, and then going to a chair in alternate sets, 40-minute sittings. So I could do that, and it subsided the pain. And I began concentrating on a meme that I had set for myself, which was, what is it? Meaning, what is it I'm really looking for? What is it I want? What is it that I'm dissatisfied with? What is it that I imagine enlightenment or kensho might be? And in the absence of being, tortured by pain, I just settled into that. And I settled into it with every breath, day after day after day. And somewhere on the 6th day, we get up and we walk around every number of periods. You hold your hands like this and you do a fast walk around the zendo and out on the porch and out around a big porch outside to get your blood moving and to get you re-stimulated. And I was just doing that, just what is it, what is it? I was hanging there and I stepped out, and at a certain point, Camp J began screaming, and it sounded like he was in my ear, screaming, and I got furious. This fucking bird is just blowing my eye here. And I just exploded with rage, and all of a sudden, I heard his eek, 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 as it, and I disappeared. I don't know for how long, but everything was the same. I just wasn't there. My personality wasn't there. I was just seeing things as it is. And my first thought was, holy shit, what am I going to do now? Because I had built Buddhism as a bastion against addiction, against the wild life of the counterculture, against the life of hedonism and indulgence and all my bad habits. And suddenly I understood that it was no more permanent than mist, than fog. Like everything, it was a soap bubble. Everything is changing. And I was flummoxed by that. I was flattened by that. And then I realized, well, wait, Buddha had that experience too. And his reaction to that experience was to decide to teach. It took him 49 days, but he decided he could help some people, even though he thought maybe it was too subtle or too ephemeral. And I thought, okay, that's how he expressed his compassion. He'd try. I thought, I can try. And when I consulted with my teacher about that, and I can't remember if I'd become a priest by then or not, but he said to me, look, there'll be people ahead of you to learn from, and there'll be people ahead of you to help. It's also worth saying that many of the greatest Zen masters did not have kensho. It's not the end of the road. The great Rinzai master Hakuin had 5 or 7 kenshos, but the one he considered the most valuable was his understanding that the Eightfold Path, which was the Buddha's way, we walk through life modeling the life of a Buddha. Right view, right speech, right attitude, right energy, right occupation, that in itself was enlightened. It was generated by an enlightened mind. So if you go to sit zazen and you are sitting on a cushion over here with the self that you imagine you have, and you have enlightenment over here, they're never going to come together, because the self that you imagine you have doesn't exist in the way you think it does. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I am saying what the Buddha said, it's not fixed. I don't care how deeply you look inside yourself, you can't find it. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a location. What it actually is an awareness, which is the great news. If it was an armature, if it was something that corresponded to an organ, then would it have fixed properties? Then you could say, oh yeah, I'm just a poor messed up person. I bent this way, my mother did that, my father did this. But it's just an awareness. So anything that you don't like about yourself is actually subject to change by practice and rigor and investigation. And that's what we do when we meditate. And so that and the freedom that's delivered by impermanence, by understanding that everything's impermanent. If things were not impermanent, we couldn't change. If we had a fixed self, we couldn't change. But we know our bodies change, our attitudes change, our friendships change, everything changes. So impermanence itself is the gift of great freedom. And so I finished that session and I thought, okay, well, now I know what I have to practice. Now I know what I have to concentrate on. And I became a priest, and whose job basically is to serve people and to help people. And then about 5 years later, my teacher gave me transmission, which is, he puts a meat thermometer in you and he says, you're done. And he gives me the freedom to teach independently and ordain my own priests, which I've done, and I've transmitted and am training my successor so that I can stop teaching.
So as a teacher, what do you say to like a dilettante like me who is interested in it, has been an intermittent meditator, lapsed? I mean, I've spent my time very adjacent to it. I've been to the Zen Center, actually ran a Zen hospice and worked there for years, and tried to live a life of service in various ways, but I'm far from enlightened and not a good practitioner. What do you say to somebody like that? Which is, I think, I'm not the only one in this room who might be.
Well, the first thing I'd say is don't sell yourself short. You're in this room and you're practicing according to what you know and to what you believe. So give yourself credit, you know. You're not trying to undermine the system of law or democracy or take advantage of unregulated capitalism. Let me just run you through the Four Noble Truths, that Buddha's first four things. When he had his enlightenment experience, he came down the road back to the 6 ascetics he'd been sitting with in the jungle for 4 years. And they were pissed off at him because he had passed out in a ditch, and a young girl was carrying an offering of milk and rice to a temple, and she saw this skeleton laying in the gutter, and she stopped and she fed him. And he was so moved by this act of compassion and by the nourishment of the food that he realized this was not a battle between matter and spirit, between the body and spirit. There's actually mind and body. If they're not one, they're not two. So he sat down and he resolved to sit until he was enlightened, and he did. And then he thought for 49 days, figured out how to talk to people. And he came back to talk to these guys, and they saw him coming down the road. Remember, he wasn't Deepak Chopra. He wasn't a big deal. He was just the schmendrick that they'd been practicing with for 6 years. But there was something about the way he carried himself that they looked at him and they went, oh, wait a minute. This guy's onto something. And so he broke down what he learned as the Four Noble Truths. And I'll tell you what they are, because they're often misunderstood. The first noble truth is dukkha. And Buddha defined what it was in this speech. Dukkha is birth, it's death, it's grieving, it's physical pain, it's loss, it's being stuck in a situation that you don't want to be stuck into, or it's being deprived of a situation that you do want to be in. And early Christian translators translated it as suffering. And that's sort of where Buddhism got this pessimistic reputation of, you know, life is nothing but suffering. And suffering tended to concentrate on the mental aspects. It's not that I'm sick, it's that I'm fretting about the sickness. Who'll take care of my kids? How will I work? What will happen with my rent? Buddha told us what affliction was, and he called it a noble truth. Now, if it means anything, true means real, and noble means worthy of dignity, worthy of respect. So he said that to alleviate the possibility that you're thinking you're suffering or afflicted because you're spiritually unevolved. No, that's the nature of the world. We live in a peppered wind. Everything is afflicted because that's the energy that keeps things changing and moving. You get too hot, you move away from the fire. You get too cold, you move closer to the fire. Gary Snyder describes it as thickening the plot. So it's not our fault. We can't help it, but it's the fact of existence. That's the first noble truth. Don't blame yourself. Second noble truth is called samudaya, and it means arising. And it means when you're afflicted, stuff arises. A jerk cuts you off in a car, anger, rage, fear arise. Not your fault either. It just happens. It's the second noble truth. You have to accept it, you have to see it, you have to own it, but it's not because you're spiritually undeveloped. So the third noble truth is the first one you can do something about, and it's called naroda. And the word naroda comes from the description of a clay wall that Indian peasants used to make around a fire pit to stop the flames and sparks from going into the fields and the villages and burning them down. It means containment. And the fires to Buddha are the human passions: greed, hate, delusion, all of our evolutionary baggage that we carry that maybe once upon a time had some utility to us, but in a world of nuclear weapons, they're just suicidal. So what he taught us was that by meditating, you can learn to trust that anything that arises in you, you can contain. There's no thought, there's no impulse, there's no nothing you have to be afraid of. And when you think about it, it's the running away from thoughts and feelings and impulses that gets us in trouble. That's what has us buying weapons, trying to get too wealthy, spending too much, waking up in the wrong bed, using drugs, using alcohol. When we're sitting still, our karma is working on emptiness. No matter what's moving through us, we're not engaging our muscles, we're not engaging our speech, we're not creating karma. So meditating, that's the crucible in which we become more and more intimate with our inner life. And it's important because it's not easy to realize that you're not the good guys. We're human beings. And human beings encompasses the full spectrum of everything from Hitler to Mother Teresa. And if you don't know that you encompass that full spectrum, you're a dangerous person. If you think you're the good guys, you wind up dropping bombs on hotels in Baghdad in the middle of the night, killing men, women, and children in their beds because your leaders don't like their leaders. Those are people who have expunged their shadow. They've put their shadow sides on other people and called them enemies. Human beings, we are powerful and we are very dangerous. And the real reason for Buddhist mindful practices is to make sure that aberrant and negative energies don't get past our teeth or don't get past our muscles. You know, to give somebody the finger when they cut you off is right next to pulling a trigger. So what we practice is getting rid of the trigger and owning the emotion. Someone cuts us off, someone says something that makes us angry, immediately forget about that person. What arose in you is yours. And that's what you can speculate on and recognize and accept and interrogate and do not have to attach to an idea of a self and make it a permanent part of your identity. Fully be with it, let it come, and it will pass. Nobody has any strong feelings about artificial flowers because they're not dying. What makes flowers special is that they're transient, and each of us are just flowers. So the fourth noble truth, after you've learned to contain whatever arises, is to model the life of a Buddha in your life. And we have these precepts, these ways that we ourselves judge ourselves with. There's no Buddhist cop out there. And so right view is one of them. Right view is understanding that the world is both simultaneously a singular event, your singular body, and all of it. If you just think of it as I'm in here and the rest of it is out there, that's only half the story. It's going to lead you to delusion and error. Right speech, right view, right attitude. Am I talking about these people in the kindest way I can, in the nicest way I can? Is my employment and the way in which I make money hurting people, hurting the earth, or is it helpful? And those are the things that we ask ourselves at the juncture of every decision to try to say, is my life congruent and in line with the life of a Buddha? And that's basically it. And so I'd say the only thing that's most helpful to that is meditating. Buddhism's not exactly a religion because Buddha was not a holy figure. He made it very clear that he was just a person, just a mortal person. And he figured out this apparent solution, this solution to the apparent idea that we're in here and the rest of it is out there. And he gave you a practice where the faith in the practice is based on experience, not based on miracles or something you have to accept. Your faith grows because you'll see meditation and this stuff works. Is that helpful?
So, engaged Buddhism is a concept that you were leading to, in a sense, in terms of being out in the world trying to do good. And so, what is a bodhisattva other than a song by Steely Dan?
Yeah. So a bodhisattva is a person who basically dedicates themselves to the service of others to the degree that they say, let everybody be enlightened first. I'll go last. And it was an incredibly ingenious solution to the problem of spiritual competition. Because we've all been well, I've been in a lot of Buddhist groups where people are like running over one another to get enlightened. It's done very decorously, and you have to read the signals. The Bodhisattva said, go ahead. My job is to take care of people, and I'm going to take care of people. So a lot of people get crosswise with me because I'm a very political person. And I'm political because I grew up in a political family, but also because it seems completely consistent with the precepts and the attributes of being a Buddhist. Politics is about the relations between people. And so what is there but that Buddhists do? We relate one-on-one, one person at a time. We seek to help them. So, for instance, if there are among us citizens who are not receiving the full protections of the Constitution or the full advantages of the economy, or name your poison, because of their race or religion or color, isn't that our business as Buddhists to say, wait, this is a systemic problem. We can analyze this system. We can fix it because we don't have to be quiet because of the king. Our founding fathers gave us free speech, gave us the right to speak up and hold dialogues and attitudes about this. So I've been very outspoken about the fact that if you sit by taking advantage of the privileges you get because you're white and well-educated, while millions of people don't, you're turning a blind eye to your own culpability and the ways in which neutrality actually becomes a form of oppression to other people. So I talk a lot in this book about race. I talk a lot about political situations. And is this a good time to talk about bad faith?
We'll get there in a sec.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a news junkie, as it were. I mean, I'm just read the papers and such every day. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, about 150 years ago, said, reading the newspapers is like taking a bath in blood every morning. You know, the old saying is, if it bleeds, it leads. And so the news is bad all over the place. And I'm thinking about Buddhism in this context. It's the great historian Arnold Toynbee, maybe the greatest, people say, once said, the coming of Buddhism to the West may well prove to be the most important event of the 20th century. So that was the 20th century. I get the idea. I don't see it as having changed a lot here. Now, we don't have a control group. There's no, West with no Buddhism. Who knows what might have happened. But do you think it's had a positive impact in the broader world, the political world, et cetera?
Well, I think it's had a certain impact in helping a small number of people achieve a kind of stability and wisdom but I don't think it's achieved all it could. One of my teachers, Robert Aitken, started the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, and he was very involved with engaged Buddhism, as am I. Many of the practices of Tibet, of Japan, of China are basically 12th century practices. They were devolved in feudal political climates. And to replicate them with great fidelity and strength as if that practice itself represented enlightenment or wisdom, I think is an error. I'm an admitted minority, but I try to stay fully cognizant of how much space and liberty we have as Westerners, how psychology could be thought of as the compassion of the West, and how political analysis can be thought of as a clear understanding of how political systems can make people suffer or alleviate their suffering. And so one of the things that Buddhist practice helps with is seeing things clearly and maintaining a kind of calmness. And as crazy and batshit upside down, topsy-turvy as things get, it's helpful to have people who are calm and clear and fearless, who can call things out for what they are. I'll give you an example. I just published a site online. It's called Smothered by Riches. It's an article. And people think that Donald Trump and this chaos of the present day some kind of an accident. But actually it starts with a guy named Lewis Powell in 1968, who wrote a white paper to the US Chamber of Commerce decrying the liberalism of students and the news media and universities and how these people were intolerant of the free enterprise system. And he laid out a blueprint which the Republican right has been following in lockstep for 60 years. Neoliberalism, which is unregulated capitalism. And they had a whole bunch of young millionaires, the Koch brothers, Richard Scaife, who's a Mellon heir, Joseph Coors, and they backed these and they set up think tanks with TV studios and radios. They promoted their authors, they bought them, they gave scholarships to young kids and brought them to Washington and gave them fellowships with conservative legislators. And they've been doing this to great success. And we'll get to how great and how threatening it is in a minute. But one of the worst things that happened was these were the forces that put Ronald Reagan in the presidency. Ronald Reagan brought Pat Buchanan in, who brought in the evangelicals and the militias, and Reagan killed the fair practices doctrine. Fair practices mandated that the airwaves belong to the people of the United States. They were our property. And for that reason, all political discussions had to cover every aspect of an issue. Even down to if I spoke badly about you, the station would have to give you an invitation to come on and defend yourself and alternate your program. Well, the right wing started an attack on the fairness doctrine, saying it impinged on free speech. And as the internet began to bring up all these little shoots of radio stations, Reagan's FCC ended the fairness doctrine, and that's where hate radio started. And that's where all of these little shock jocks and independent things happened, where there was no common source of fact. That's where we became unmoored from fact. That was in the 60s. And then Bill Clinton allowed them, they were held, you could only own a TV station and a radio in one market. And Bill Clinton ended that. And within the space of 2 years, they went down from several hundred media outlets to 6. So everything we see and hear on every television, they're all owned by some of the greatest, largest corporations in the world. And in the 60s, they changed from being nonprofit to being profit centers. And the change from nonprofit to profit centers, Bill Paley, who owned CBS, said to his reporters in 1960, "Don't worry about money. I have Jack Benny to make money." And the CBS News was like the hood ornament on a Rolls Royce, certifying to the prestige and the excellence of it. Well, when Dateline came out with stories that weren't even current, it began minting money, and every corporation changed and demanded that their news programs become profit centers, contribute to the profit center. And they got rid of the old men, Edward R. Murrow, Huntley and Brinkley, Walter Cronkite. They got younger, hipper, sexier, chattier people to talk. And they were going for the equator around the Earth, which is the biggest circle you can draw around the Earth, which is the mean IQ. So stories got simpler. They didn't get in depth. Everything was he said, she said. They bring all these experts on, the Heritage Foundation. They don't tell you that the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing organization funded by multi-billionaires. They just treat it as equal with every other think tank. So the public is uninformed. Everything is he said, she said, with value systems like that, and we no longer share a common source of truth. So we have 230 people in Congress who are actively promoting an insurrection, denying the validity of an election that 60 judges, including Trump-appointed Republican judges, said were fair and sound elections. And it's because we have no sound basis of truth. So there are consequences to these policies, and we're living in them. So this 60-year shift, starting with Lewis Powell all the way through to Donald Trump, it's not an accident. It was a strategy. It was well-funded, and they began taking aim at the universities. Every bastion of liberal thought, every bastion of democracy. Think of executives who only think of their bottom line. They're tired of EPA regulations protecting the air and the water and the soil. They're tired of union contracts. They can ship stuff out to Indonesia with no health and safety regulations, lower wages. They're tired of being told what to do or setting land aside. So we're facing an existential crisis. We're going to have to end the cattle business. Nobody's talking about it. We're going to have to end fossil fuel. Nobody's really coming up with policies or things we can try. And we're all living out the karma of this policy and program, which is leading us into an unknown reality. And people are frightened and angry. And when they get frightened and angry and fearful, they get violent. And so there's all this specter of violence that's going around as if it had no cause, as if it was just dumb people and good people. But we're the same species that lived in Afghanistan or Iraq or Saudi Arabia and anything that can go, or Iran, and the summary executions and the mafias and all those things could occur here if we don't defend democracy, if we don't honor the rule of law. And yet, that's coming up before us as a choice in November. We're going to follow the rule of law, or we're going to ask foreign businesses to invest their money here if the law is a permeable matter, if contracts are up for grabs, if when you're stopped by the police you can be shaken down. That's what's really at stake and is not being talked about by corporate media in the detail that it should be, so it falls to the Buddhists.
You are a renowned narrator of many things, and especially the Ken Burns documentaries. Got a couple of Emmys for it and so forth. And, actually, I get all my cultural and political wisdom from The Simpsons. And just a few months ago, I was watching that, and I hear this voice come out, and I said, now that's the big time,
Yeah.
But you've got a brand new one out that you say is the most important one you've ever done. So will you tell us about Bad Faith?
Yeah. The risk of ruining your day.
And Pete, let's be a little short.
Okay.
We're running, yeah.
There's a film out called Bad Faith, and you can go online, badfaithdocumentary.com. You can see a 5-minute trailer. You can see it for 99 cents on YouTube. You can see it on Amazon Prime. And it's the story of right-wing evangelical groups which are using the cover of religion to gain political power. They're training 1,000 people at a time to be election workers. They've got computer systems that are super sophisticated, paid for by the Koch brothers. They're studying swing counties. And you can see them in their own words saying, fuck democracy, we want Christ. Or we're going to make you Christians whether you like it or not. And they're just out there. They don't want a country with LGBTQ people. They want women in the kitchen. They don't want abortions or mifeprestone. And there's a project called 2025, which is done by the Heritage Foundation, 900 pages of policies ready for the next Republican president. They don't need Trump. Trump's done his job of disturbing the norms and weakening faith in the government. But the next Republican president will be following this doctrine, and you can look it up online, whether it's putting the FBI under the authority of the president or firing 50,000 civil service professionals and replacing them with loyalists. That's our future if we don't handle this election correctly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I have a family member who's a Republican and a evangelical, but he's also very smart and a brilliant physician, actually. And I asked him after a couple of beers one time on the beach, I got brave enough to say, what do you think of this guy, Donald? And he looked very uncomfortable and he said, the Antichrist works in very mysterious ways.
Yeah.
So
well, these people
not
are
all
not
hope
Christians.
is lost there,
These
right?
people are called Christian nationalists, and they're using Christ as a cover for basically fascist government. There are lots of Christian evangelists who are wonderful people and Pentecostals, but Christian nationalism is its own thing.
I want to ask you about shifting a little bit. Some of us, including here, are getting older, and
No.
I've heard. And so the Buddha was first, his path was triggered by perceiving aging, death, suffering. As I go on, many more people and even creatures that I love dropping away. It can be consuming over time when you get older and so many people are missing. And I lost a dog 4 years ago that I still can't really talk about without crying, So what's your, advice on that? How do you deal with the constant presence of loss and impermanence in that which you love?
Well, let me share an image with you. Imagine you were standing on a cliff in Bolinas and you were looking at the ocean on a choppy day. Millions of little peaked waves, not rollers. Every one of those little peaked waves could represent a named thing in the universe, could represent an individual life, could represent a species, could represent a culture, could represent a place, a plant, an insect, doesn't matter. They come up out of the formlessness of the ocean and they assume shape for a little while, and then they go back into the ocean. Another one goes up. And we call them, when they're in form, we call that living. And when they go back to the ocean, we call it dying. But what those little waves don't remember, and what we don't remember, is that they've never not been part of the ocean. So for everyone who dies, there's more of them left than went away. Because it's not like oxygen exists to keep us alive. Oxygen is our life. Sunlight is our life. Microbes in the soil that grow our food is our life. Pollinating insects is our life. Trees producing oxygen is our life. We have these umbilical cords attaching ourselves to the entire universe, even to the place of the Earth in the solar system. If we were closer to the sun, water would boil off. We couldn't live. If we were farther away, it would, closer it would freeze, no burn. Farther away, it would freeze. And that's held in place by all the forces in the universe. So someone asked Suzuki Roshi, what happens when we die? He said, nothing. The sun comes up, the birds sing, the creeks keep rolling. And all those things were the person that we loved that left. So I always say of my friends, well, they'll be back as the rain. They'll be back in the crow's call in the morning. Because that's what they were. So all that left is this sack of flesh. And of course, I'm going to grieve. It's a loss. I'm not going to see them in this starlight again. But if I remember that they were always all of this, it eases my suffering because there's so much more left.
A couple of really quick questions and answers here. You now live, you have dogs and cats, right?
Yeah.
Which one's better?
One cat. I can tell you a terrible joke a friend of mine told me once. Put your dog and your wife in the trunk of the car and lock them in. Come back in 20 minutes and see which one's glad to see you.
That is terrible.
It is terrible, but I thought, this is not a violent room.
Yeah.
The cat was my neighbor's cat,
Okay.
who whipped my two dogs and just moved in. And
Yeah, they'll do that.
Yeah.
But you can, you can love both. I always have. I call it being bipedal.
yeah, very good. Very good.
You're a musician. You play guitar. You love music your whole life. Who are the three great? You're a guitarist. Three greatest guitarists of all time.
What? Charlie Christian, Bruce Foreman, who's still living, Mississippi John Hurt.
Jazz and blues, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I grew up on.
Let's look at your other most recent book.
Okay.
It's called Tongue of a Crow, Poems. I love the title. I'm a crow whisperer. I'm actually on first name basis with some of them. We
I
know
feed
each other.
40 crows a day.
There you go.
I call them in, haw, haw, and they come from every direction. It's like a Hitchcock movie. And I keep 50 pounds of shelled peanuts. And we chat, and I can sit down, and they grumble and gargle. And
So, have you been writing? This is your first.
it's my first book
Yeah,
of
have you been
poems,
writing
but I've
poetry
been
a long time.
since I was 6.
That's what it seemed like. This covers a lot of your life
Yeah.
through. Yeah.
So I won't read the immature ones.
Yeah. Well, I'll start off with the shortest one.
Okay.
Which is titled Olima. Hardwood burns as hot when I have money as when I don't.
It's a little haiku.
You read a couple more.
Yeah, just quick. This is called The Dogs of Bucharest. I was filming a movie there. Shitty movie. The dogs of Bucharest are dusted with crumbled mansions, ash of red flags. They doze in ruined dreams abandoned by their masters. They bark, whelp, and die without plan or permission. Occasionally, like thinkers, like poets, they are rounded up and shot. A bitch with flapping teats haunts the ruined foundry where I film diversions for my country. Feral eyes watch me poke a sumptuous lunch, the roll I proffer. She trembles, her whimpering pups beneath a rack of iron. Sad and sooty sumacs, tattered sorrel, scattered pages of a book. It's cheap to film in ruined lands. There's a story that the Buddha gave his body to starving lion cubs. The hunger of the dog. Would a better man feed her his fingers? This is written in the Mill Valley Marsh, called The World on Fire. Tarnished silver sky, a lid on the salt marsh. Clouds steam over the far hills, stingy with rain. Geese, egrets, herons, pigments smeared across the sky. The last pelican, the last small birds, each panting breath begging the rain. Morning's last damp hope evaporates. A scalding ray pierces the clouds, ignites the bush beside me, orange berries blazing, as if I needed reminding the world is burning. So just two quick ones. So this actually happened at my little farm out in Sebastopol. It's called Hawk Feathers. The tangerine tree, pregnant with its weight of tiny suns, shades the deck, bird feeders, and suet. Television twitters from inside. I've hung hawk feathers on threads to deter the birds from smashing the reflections of trees, far hills, and clouds. But still, here's a tiny goldfinch stunned on the boards. I blow on it and it blinks. Set it near the water dish, on guard. The hills, the silence of laurel, apple blossoms, plum blossoms. Inside, the president blames a stylish Muslim congresswoman for 9/11. Who will rid me of this troublesome priest? The finch flaps its baby wings twice, lofts its puffball body into the air, falls 10 inches, clutches the thorns of a climbing rose. A sharp-shinned hawk hurtles from within the tangerines, tearing it off into emptiness. My children live far away. Here's the last one. You could say this is sort of a metaphor for the current time. It's called The Burned Oak. They rooted too long during the war, ate the tender shoots after the forest burned, the water fouled. Mount a watch, herd what swine are left into the rusty pen, make a gate from the old barn boards. Women wet the knives. The oldest boy chooses, shoots it in the head. A .22 will do the job, but it may scream. Force a sharpened rod between back leg, tendon, and bone, hoist it into the burned oak. Cut the throat, drain the blood into a bucket if you can find one. Pour scalding water down the body, scrape the hair off the skin, take a sharp blade, slice the belly open, move the organ meat to the kid's wagon. Squeeze the guts clean, wash for winter sausage. We need something like a barrel to pack what we don't eat with salt in case the generator goes, in case we have to fight again.
I really liked to see this because it reminded me, I hadn't really thought of you as a poet, but I remember when we first met, something like 30-something years ago, and working on different things, and you said, we were actually having lunch over the hill somewhere, Tiburon, I think, and you said, I'm stuck in this acting thing, but I really want to be a writer and poet when I grow up. So,
Show you how practical I am. I became an actor in the movies because I figured it would protect me from writing for money.
But the thing that happened then that was fascinating to me too, and I'm wondering, fame as a hindrance in a way. This was when you were making those, so your profile was very public. And as we were leaving there, I've told this before, but there was a young man kind of following us nervously with a camera, and I knew he was looking at you, and we got out to our cars. We had the same car, the green BMW 2002, and this guy, the kid finally got the nerve, and he came and said, "Do you mind if I take your picture?" And Gracie said, "Of course, go ahead." He snapped, and then he said, "Who are you? I know you're somebody, but I don't know who." And it was like a Zen koan almost about the illusion of fame. It was just the fact that he knew you were in the movies.
Well, I hope I said, if you find out, tell me.
Yeah. So finally, if I may, you're a newlywed.
A what?
A newlywed now.
Oh, yes, I am.
Yeah. So this is part of practice, too. Some would say family, relationships like that. My favorite Ram Dass quote is, if you ever start to suspect you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family.
Yeah.
So
Speak to my ex-wives.
I just want to say congratulations and hope springs eternal, right? It's great.
Well, it's a statement of optimism to marry at 82. And the theme of our wedding was third time's the charm, because both of us had been married twice before, and I think we got this one right.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. If I may say just one thing personal, too, although it's ancient street, these paintings that Oren mentioned by Cynthia Fletcher all around this room, these are by my first girlfriend from college. We were together for years. We broke up and it was horrendous. We didn't talk for 30 years. We reconnected and I was able to arrange to help her. She turned into this artist. And the lesson there was, they say time heals all wounds. They just don't say how much time. So patience is a virtue.
Exactly.
So I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Now. Thank you very much for coming.
Don't take it, don't, don't take it, don't, don't take it, don't take it, don't.